Alright, the plan for today is to go over Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. I'm going to tape both those lectures. After I go over that, I'm going to go over the review for the written tests for Chapters 6 and 7. Whatever time is left will be for you to work on the next homework. Speaking of which, what that means is you will be responsible for doing the homework for Chapter 6, both the extra exercises and the short exercises. You'll notice if you look on here, there are 5 extra exercises. And as far as the short exercises go, there are 3 of those. All right, so again, we're going to go over Chapter 6 and 7 right now. Tomorrow we'll go over some additional exercises on working with the DOM and the like, and just go over some of those for an hour or so, and the rest of the period will be lab. And Wednesday we'll have the written test for Chapter 6 and the written test for Chapter 7, and the rest of the period will be lab. 1 week from today, I'm going to write some kind of a pre-test on the weekend. All right, so you have some kind of an idea of what to expect, and then a week from tomorrow, which will be what, the 27th, I believe, you will have your next hands-on test, and that will be any material from Chapters 1 through 7, but it'll be based on mainly Chapters 6 and 7. All right, so as you can see, and I had to use new software, so this is not going to be probably as seamless as it has been in the past. I don't like, they made me change the software. I didn't realize this, but the software that I was using, I only had a license on it for literally 365 days. And so I got a hold of them and I said, hey, I use this stuff all the time. Well, you can download and you can put it on the desktop app. Oh, okay. Except that you have almost no control with the desktop app as far as moving stuff up and down. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I was playing around with it on Friday, so if all of a sudden the pages start to go a little squirrely, I'll do what I can to fix them. But again, this corresponds to your book, page 163 in the book. All right? And again, I don't want to sit and read to you. So let's just take a quick look. Again, one thing I like about this chapter, you may or may not agree with, but they're going to talk about the different things you need to do DOM scripting. Then they're going to do it. They're going to do it using an FAQ page. They're going to do it using a register application. So throughout the chapter, they will talk about different things, and then they will demonstrate those different things. So what I'm going to do is basically I'm going to concentrate on what's on the pages on the right-hand side. So I'm moving down here, or up here, whatever you want to call it, to page 165. And I did mention this to you before, but I want you to hear it again. When you go and write any kind of web page, basically what happens in the background is anything and everything that's on that page, the browser creates something. It's more or less invisible, but it's known as the DOM, or the document object model. So in other words, they're showing here, this is the code you have for the web page. Not much stuff there. And this is the DOM that gets created based on that page. All right. The idea is the more things you have on the page that you want to be able to manipulate programmatically, you have to give them IDs. All right. Now, if it turned out that I wanted to be able to grab every single bit of text here, 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 and here, then IDs wouldn't be that important if I wanted to grab all of them. Then I could use classes. And I don't know if we've talked about this much, if at all, but it is possible for you to take any element. For instance, this H1 element that's right here. All right. You could say H1 and you could say ID equals, hello, which would be a stupid name, but you get the idea. You can also say class equals by. So in other words, you can go and assign both an ID and a class to the same element if you need to do that. You can also assign multiple classes to the same element if you need to do that. So if I wanted to have two different classes here, I would just put a blank space and then I would put in the next class. That, again, is totally legitimate to do that. And as we talked about a little in the past, the reason that you might want to do that is you may want to be able to manipulate the stuff that's in here. All right? Yes? No, the question was, does that mean that the class will override anything that the ID does? What is supposed to happen is the ID is more specific than the class. So the ID is supposed to override anything that's written with the class. And just to make sure that happens, it's always recommended that you put the ID specification after the class specification. All right, as far as where it's listed in your CSS. All right, but it goes from least specific to most specific, and class is less specific than ID is. Okay. Now, when you look on here, there's a few things for you to realize. The first thing is when you look, some of this stuff in here has nothing at the bottom. If nothing comes after it, so these four text things that you see right here and this input, they're known as leaf nodes. They don't have any child. So in other words, this text is the child of that span. This text is the child of that label. This input has no children. This form has 3 children, and it literally has 2 grandchildren. Sometimes you will hear people talk about that with an inheritance hierarchy, much like you'd have in your family. All right? When you look at the very top here, at the top, as it says, is HTML. And the HTML is also known there as the root node. It's at the top. It has 2 children, a head and a body. So you can all see this. This is all the stuff in the head. This is all the stuff in the body. All right? And if we look back up, if I move this up a little, you'll notice, that a bunch of the stuff that's in here, there it goes, has IDs and or classes associated with it. Again, that's anything that we may decide that we want to manipulate programmatically. All right? So this whole thing that you see down here, that, as it says, is known as the DOM or the document object model. The stuff that's in there, they're known as nodes, N-O-D-E-S. All right? And you can see in there, if you look, okay, it says there, document is the root node. So that really is right here. Elements, an element in the web page. It can have element text and comment nodes. Yeah, even comments that you put in there go into the DOM. Even if you put a blank space, it goes into the DOM. Everything that's in there. ATTR, well, hopefully you realize that stands for an attribute. All right? And again, notice as it says here with text, that's, for instance, that's the text that would go in the span. That's the text for the label, the text for the H1, the text for the title. Those are automatically leaf nodes, meaning they can't have children. All right? So, as it says on the bottom here of page 165, and again, I don't want to read to you. All right? But it is a hierarchy. Okay? All right. As it says, JavaScript can modify the web page because it can modify the DOM. If you modify the DOM and you refresh the page, you'll immediately see the results that are on that page. All right? And this is real dry stuff, but if you want stuff even drier than this lecture, go out, as it says there, and go out and read the DOM core specification. All right? There was a time in my life I thought it was possible I was going to become a technical writer. And then I saw what I'd be writing all day long. And it just was dry stuff. It was manuals and stuff like that. I couldn't handle that. All right. So this DOM is made up of, more than anything else, it's made up of what are called nodes. And if you look on page 167, it says there, here are some properties of what's called the node interface. Some of this you've looked at already. What do I mean? We've worked with next element sibling, and we've worked with first child. What the DOM allows you to do is to manipulate your way across the web page. And anything that's in there, so I'm not going to go back to that, but if you remember all that stuff that said text on it that I just showed you on those pictures, you can work with this stuff and you can change the text that's in there. All right, and that's some of the stuff that we're going to be doing in the next couple days. So, as it says, the node value returns the text that's stored in the node, if there's anything there. You'll notice with all of these things, it's trying to return something. If there's nothing that exists in there, it returns null, meaning there isn't anything. So if I'm at the very bottom and I ask for next element sibling, there won't be one, so it'll return null. That kind of an idea. Now, it gets hinky, for lack of better words. So they show you some examples there. The good news is, again, this stuff that's in here is pretty similar to what I've shown you before. In fact, the first exercise that you're supposed to do, I think it's in the extra exercises, is the same miles per gallon thing that I showed you in class. In other words, they ask you to go in there and they ask you to use the next element sibling, and they basically ask you to go in with a span tag to choose the first child and put error messages in there as opposed to alerts. I showed it to you already in both ways. That exercise literally should take you a matter of minutes to do because you've done it already. And you'll notice that once you do that, notice how you can go in here and you can grab text that's in here. So they show you the HTML and then they show you how to get text. Please look up on the screen because this is an important thing for you to realize. All right? If whatever it is you're looking for, if it's on the right-hand side of an equal sign, you're getting that value and you're copying it over to a variable. If what you're looking for is on the left-hand side of an equal sign, you are setting that value. So if you want to get the value, you put whatever it is you want to get on the right-hand side of an equal sign. If you want to set a value, you put whatever it is on the left-hand side of an equal sign. All right? So this is not by any means meant to be every single thing up here in this chart that's on the top of page 167. This is not everything there is when you go and you do what's called DOM scripting. But it is probably the 5 or 6 ones that you will end up using the most often. All right. Now notice in the examples above, the $sign calls the function, it gets the element that has it. Guess what? You know what that is already. We've already talked, we've already gone in there and aliased the document.getElementById. So when they mention that, you've been using that for a while now. Next, they talk on 168 and 169. As you see there, they talk about the methods of the document and element interfaces. Again, you look on here and you go, oh, we didn't have this stuff yet. We didn't have get elements by tag name, get elements by name, get elements by class name. No, we haven't dealt with those yet. But do you notice when you look up on the screen here and you look at that first chart that's on page 169, every single one of them doesn't say get element singular, it says get elements plural. So the idea is it can return an array of multiple items. Does that make sense? So let's say that what I wanted to do was I wanted to go through a very complex web page, and I wanted to find every single paragraph that was in there and maybe turn it red. I don't know, for whatever reason. I could use a get elements by tag name, and the tag would be the p tag. Does that make sense? All right. On the other hand, let's say that I had a complex web page and I had a class that I called hello, like I showed you before, and I applied that class named hello to an unordered list and to a paragraph and to an h3 tag. Then I could say get elements by class name. So there's different ways that you can do this. All right, and there's a get elements by name. Returns an array of all element objects descended from the document or element that have a name attribute that specifies, that matches the specified name. The two you're going to use most often of these three on the list are the first one and the last one. All right, along with get element by ID, which we've already been using. All right. So then later on page 169, they show some of the elements you would commonly use with this. Has attribute. Returns true if the element has the attribute specified in name. So I can check to see whether or not any element on the page actually has that particular class or whatever. All right. Get element, as it says, returns the value of the element. Do you understand, if you look up on the screen there, get is like read only. And I gave you this example much earlier in the year. It's the first day of class. Chris comes in, and I've never met him before. And I notice that I have 10 people in the class, and 5 of them are named Chris. All right. So he said, I said, I introduced myself. I say, what's your name? And he says, Chris. And I said, you know what? No one's going to call you Chris in here. We're just going to call you by your last name because we've got so many Chris's. All right. So that would be setting his name. If I ask him his name and he says Chris, and he's the only one, that would be getting his name. So get is read only, where you ask somebody for something and they give it to you. Set is not write only, but it's a write type of property. Gets are also called accessors because they allow you to access information. Sets are also called mutators because they allow you to mutate or change information. All right? And they give you examples here. The best way for you to understand this is to look through these examples. I'm going to try to keep this to a minimum on your next test. Believe it or not, I really am. All right. But I would say this would be one of the pages that you're going to want to dog ear on your book. You'll fold it over, whatever. Remember it. Because if I ask you to do something, you should be able to do what's ever shown on here. If I ask you to basically replicate the examples that are shown on page 169. All right. Then turning up and looking on 170 and 171, if you're interested, and like I said, it's some dry reading, but there's tons of information in it, you can go out there. Anything that starts with www.w3.org/tr is going to be a very boring read. All right? But it's literally where the specification, it's literally where everything is. All right. So it says here, typical properties available with the DOM specification. All right. So basically for anything you have on a page, you can get its ID, you can get its title if it has one, you can get its class name, you can get its tag name if it has one. All right. Notice that for an A tag, anchor, the thing that you'll probably want to manipulate is href. you may want it set up that if somebody answers a question in one way, they go to one link, and if they answer it in another way, they go to another link. All right, you can do that with the href property. Image, source, and alt. All right, input disabled. So it says here how the HTML DOM spec can simplify your code. I will tell you, when you first learn this stuff, you might think to yourself, this isn't simplifying anything. It's making it really hard. But the idea, again, you got to look at it from the bigger picture, is that you can use this code to literally change anything on any web page of your site. All right, we're bringing the complete interactivity in here. All right. You ever done this where you go into Google Maps or some kind of a map program, and you put in your address, let's say, and you're going to go someplace on a vacation, and you've got an address for that place you're going to, and you start to put that thing in. All right, you hit enter. What happens? Well, it's going to show you the result. It's going to show you a way of getting there. It's kind of what we're doing here. Now, they do mention on the bottom of the page here, it says the HTML spec provides shortcuts that make it easier to work with DOM nodes. Well, notice what we have here. What you could do is you could ask someone a question, or you could look at what they had put in on a form. And based on the results of that, you could take something and either enable it or disable it. All right? What if you ask someone their age? All right? And this button play, maybe it was a video, maybe it was a game, maybe it was something else, but you have deemed that the person has to be at least 16 years old in order to play it. So you ask someone their age. You say, well, what if they lie? Well, you can't control everything. All right? But it's one way that you can do this. As it says here, this entire spec is composed of interfaces that inherit properties and methods. So there's stuff that you can work with, and it's not exactly like you have to do a whole lot of work to do it. You have to learn how to set it up, and once you've set it up, it's fairly intuitive. All right, next they go over this FAQ thing. All right, one thing, again, I'm just telling you this so you hear it. What they're doing here is they are writing a frequently asked questions page. All right, so notice the H2, what is JavaScript? That's this. The div that goes below it, that's this. Another H2, which has another hidden div, another H2, which has a hidden div. Anything that has a minus means it's already open, and if you click it, it'll close. Anything that has a plus means it's closed, and if you click it, it'll change to a minus. That makes sense? All right. So you look at the HTML that's right here, and that's how you set it up. The HTML that's shown right there on page 173. Now, I don't think we're going to probably go back anymore to the leavemeathome.com website, but if we were, I could have always asked Tom, do you have an FAQ page you'd like to put in there into the site? That kind of thing. All right. Here's the associated CSS that goes with it. Now, is that important? Well, I want to show you what's important about this. If you look on page 175 in your book, this is the JavaScript that makes that work. All right. Now, is that big a thing? I'll tell you what's big about it. If I counted that, I'm going to guess there's about 25 lines. All right. You may or may not agree, but I'm going to just guess there's about 25 lines of code. When we get to the jQuery part, it's replaced with one line of code. That's it. You basically tell it, run the accordion. That's what this is. When you do it with just straight JavaScript, you've got to set up the HTML, you've got to set up the CSS, you've got to set up the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript. All right. When you get to jQuery, Quite often when something that you do that's going to be 10, 20, 30, 50 lines will be replaced with 1 or 2 lines. So they mention here down toward the bottom of page 175, it says the first 2 statements create an array of H2 elements with FAQ as the ID. The thing is, remember, the code itself isn't smart. So you're creating this FAQ page. You have to figure out which one is open so you can show that on the screen. And that you can change the plus sign to a minus sign. You also have to figure out, okay, do we want to set this thing up where we can only have one open at a time, and as soon as you open another one, the first one that you had open closes, or you want to allow them to open multiple of these? All right. All right. So not only can you script stuff like that, but as mentioned here on page on 176 and 177, you can also script forms and controls. Now, much of the work that used to be done in JavaScript for sitting and validating a form isn't done with JavaScript anymore. With the advent of HTML5, almost anything you can do with JavaScript, you can now do with HTML5. In fact, one of the things that we're going to end up doing before the end of the year is we're going to write some kind of form that's going to have about, I don't know, 10 fields in it or so. First name, last name, whatever. And it'll have a whole bunch of stuff. And we'll first go through it and we'll totally validate it using just HTML5. All right? Then we'll go back and we'll revalidate everything just using JavaScript. Then once we get to chapters 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, we'll validate it one more time using jQuery, just so you can see the difference in the 3 methods. All right? And again, you might raise your hand, then why is it important? Because there are millions of lines of code out there already that work where forms are validated using JavaScript or jQuery. All right, I want to show you too when we get to the jQuery part. What I'd like to show you is what's called the Jquery Plug-In, which means you download a code snippet and then you're able to use it right away. Because then you really start to unleash some of the power of working with this. All right, you know what forms are. You know how forms work. We've gone over this. You've written several forms. What you may or may not know is normally, not with what we've been doing, but normally, if you've got a form like this and you type in grace@yahoo.com and Grace and you click join our list, normally what's going to happen is that information is first got to be validated. Did you put anything into the email address? Number one. If you did, is it a valid email address? Now, there may be no one on earth that has grace@yahoo.com. You can't really validate that. But what you can validate is, okay, when they wrote that email address, is it in a correct email address format? All right, so you want to do 2 things. Is it there, and is it formatted correctly? All right. Then for the first name, is it there? You may want to say, is it letters only? But isn't it possible somebody could have a name with a foreign, descent in it, where you had somebody who had a tilde in their name, or a tick, type of thing in their name, was Renee, where you put a tilde over the E, etc. All right? But the point is, let's say it's like this. It's a valid name, a valid email address, and a valid first name. All right? Boom. You click join our list. Normally what happens is the system copies that information and sends it from your client machine over to a server machine. So it validates it. If the validation works, that information is going to be sent over to a server someplace. Anybody want to take a wild guess? You know it's Monday because you all have your Monday faces on. But does anybody want to take a wild guess once it gets over to the server? What's the first thing that happens? not all at once. It runs the exact same validations that it just ran on the client. Because what you can do on your own machine with a client is you can either turn JavaScript off, or you can spoof, where you put something in that's illegal, but you can make the system think that it is legal. But when it gets to a server, you don't want to allow, pardon my French, you don't want to allow crap into the system. So it's got to go back and run typically the same kind of validations you've just ran. The reason that they're run on the client side first is if one or more of these tests that you see here fail, there's no reason whatsoever to send it to a server. None. All you're doing is wasting the server's time, because it'll look at it and it'll send it right back. All right? So you validate on the client whenever you can, ideally 100% of the time. Then you go over to the server and you run the same tests. There may even be more extensive tests that you end up running. Now we've looked at this, and if you look, let's see, can I move that up a little? There we go. Notice we've got name here, we've got action, and we've got method. Those are all things associated with the form. All right? What I try to teach people to do, and maybe I didn't do as good a job at it this semester, is that anything that you're putting on a form or on a page that you give an ID to, give it a name also. And almost 100% of the time, the name and the ID will be identical. You use the ID property on the client side with JavaScript. You use the name property on the server side with PHP or Java server pages or ASP.NET, etc., with a different language. All right, so that's what that name is for. The action, okay, that's what you want to have happen. So in other words, when I click this, what I want to have happen after I go, oops, after I put this in and I click that button right there, what I want to have happen is I want it to call, if everything succeeds, I want it to call this file, join.php. That's a file on a server. All right? And notice here I've got method equal get. We just talked about get and set before. Get typically will not allow you to change any information. If we say post right there, that will allow you to change information. The other thing that get does is, if you've ever looked and if you've ever gone out to a website and you look in here, and let me see if I can grab something from here. Yep, that'll work. All right. You may or may not be able to see this, so let me blow it up because I want to show it to you. This is the kind of stuff that we're going to be covering not this semester, but in the future. So when you've got something that looks like this, again, let me blow it up. And you look at this right here, all right? This is the URL. That is the entire URL. What comes after the question mark is what's known as a query string. That means that a get is being used for this. And we're passing to it something called time continue, and we're passing to it something called v. Time continue is equal to 1, and v is equal to x, is6. You get the point. All right? The reason that that's important is when you pass stuff with a get, it gets passed right in the query string, right in the URL itself. So you don't put stuff in there like passwords, credit card numbers, anything that's personal. But what you can do with things with a get is you can bookmark them. We've all done bookmarks before. On the other hand, if we go and instead of writing something with a get, if we write it with a post, it doesn't show that information up as a query string in the URL. Instead, it is kind of hidden, for lack of better words, in what's called the HTTP, the Hypertext Transfer Protocol header. That's where you would bury confidential information, passwords, credit card numbers, etc. that stuff cannot be bookmarked. The main reason for that is you don't want to let somebody bookmark something that's got a password in it, or a credit card number, or whatever. All right. So as it says here, here's what happens after you sent that information and clicked it. This is what gets sent. So it's calling join PHP, and it's saying the email address is Grace. All right. The %40 is the @ yahoo.com. Ampersand means there's another thing that gets passed as well, and that is first_name, and that gets the value of Grace. All right. Why is that important? It won't be important this semester. It won't be important next semester, but next fall it will be important that you understand that. Come on. Man. So again, I would strongly suggest that before next Tuesday, when you take your test, that you take a look at the stuff that's in this chapter. All right? And if nothing else, read the page on the right, and on the bottom where it always says description or whatever at the bottom, or notes, that's usually a review of what's on the left. All right? Okay. Now, some of the other stuff that you can work with in here. Text boxes, text areas, and select object. You know what all those are already. All right? So they're objects, HTML objects that we have dealt with before. Notice now what we're doing in here is we're coming in and we're giving them names and we're giving them IDs. Why? So we can manipulate them programmatically. Why would you want to do this? Well, notice up here we've got 3 countries. We've got USA, Canada, and Mexico. If this was some kind of an application where we were going to show somebody a shopping cart, the numerical equivalent of $1 is not the same in Canada and is not the same in Mexico. So you could set the monetary denomination or whatever you're using based on this. All right. In fact, I don't know if you've ever seen that, but I've already gone out to YouTube where it's like, oh, this is going to be really good. This is exactly what I'm looking for. When I'm looking for, some kind of a lecture on something so I can watch it. Well, here's the problem. It's in Arabic. I don't know Arabic. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll provide written also. And usually, guess what? That's in Arabic. I don't know how to read it either. But sometimes on the top, you may or may not have seen this, it'll say, translate this page. And if you say yes, it'll put it into English. All right? That's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. You have to be able to provide information like this. All right? Now, some of the stuff that's in here will be stuff that we've already touched on and that you should understand. Okay? We've already worked with that value option. You've worked with the value option with a text box. You've looked at that already. All right? But you'll notice that much of the information that we work with will be value. That's the value that something you've either chosen for something or that it holds. If you look here on the bottom of page 179, they talk about it. The name and ID attributes should be set to the same value. I already mentioned that. After you use the value property, you can use the length if you need to do that. Setting the value property on a text box or text area replaces the context. Or contents, rather. Why is that important? Well, again, maybe you've seen this already, maybe you haven't. I've seen these already. There are places that will ask you to write comments in an area. So let's say that, as an example, let's say that I go out to McDonald's website and I have just gone there on Friday and they totally screwed up my order. So I go out to their website and they ask for comments. Many places, when it gets sent to the server, they've got what's called a filter. And what are they looking for? Dirty words. And they will filter those out. There are certain, you can filter in or filter out anything you want. So it could take SHI, you know what, and it could change it to $, you know, or whatever. Okay, so those are the kind of things that you can do. Not that you should do or must do, but it's sometimes. All right. The other thing that you can do in here, and this is sometimes what drives people nuts, is if you're asked to put in something into a text box, and you're asked to enter either A, B, C, or D, whatever those are, and you put in something that's not A, B, C, or D, you hit enter, it keeps you right where you were until you enter what you're being asked to enter. That's another way that this can be used. So there's also, if we look on the next couple pages here, radio buttons and checkboxes. Hopefully you all remember this. There are going to be questions on your next test. You'll be like, we went over this like in week 2? Yeah. What's the difference between a radio button and a checkbox? Radio buttons are mutually exclusive, right? You can only choose one if they're in a group. Checkboxes are not. You can choose 0, 1, more, up to all of them, type of an idea. But again, notice what we have here. For virtually everything we want to be able to manipulate, we're giving it a name and we're giving it an ID. If you take radio buttons and you put them into a group, which is what you really should be doing, the group must have the same name. So for instance, if I might make a group that would be called Year in School. And let's say we were a 4-year institution. It would have freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior, where you could only choose one of them. That kind of an idea. As far as the methods to use for forms and controls on 182 and 183, what we're used to doing is setting up a button and saying type equals submit. Yeah. But what we're going to end up doing in that submit is we're going to be putting code in there that's going to validate everything that we just put on the form. And it'll allow it to go through if everything validates, and it will not allow it to go through if one or more things do not validate. Reset, you know what that does. It resets stuff to their default values. You know what focus is. You know what blur is. We have talked about both of these. Focus is where your cursor currently is. If I've got my cursor in a name that says first name, I type JEFF in there, and I click so that my cursor goes in by where it says last name. I generated 2 events. A blur event when I left the first name and went to the last name, and a focus event where the focus has now left the first name and has now come on to the last name. I can put code in either or both of those. So let's say that I go into the first name field and I put Jeff and I put 56 after that. And I deem that you can't have numbers in a first name field. I could put you right back into that field and refuse to accept that value by putting code in the focus event or in the blur event. And notice we've looked at onClick, but there are other ones as well, as you can see in here. This is, again, not a 100% extensive list. All right? So we're talking about doing 2 things right here. One thing we're talking about doing is using the DOM to be able to manipulate what's written on a page, what's on any page. We're also talking about using this stuff for validation purposes. All right? Then they've got a register application. Fairly complex when you look at it right here. We have what? 1, 2 text boxes, 1 drop-down list, 1 set of radio buttons, and 1 checkbox. All right? As you can guess, when you click register, it's got to go and validate all these. What does that mean? Well, when you look, it looks like that is required. You have not selected a country. You have selected a contact me by. You have selected the name of service. So if I clicked reset, those would clear out, and this, if it had a default value, would be set. Otherwise, none of them would have the circle inside, and that would not have the check. So to build that, it's an HTML form, and you can see the form here on the bottom of page 185. All right. Then when you turn around and you go up to page 187, you'll notice there's a lot of stuff here. All right. Why? Because you're validating everything that you put into that form. All right. All right. Let's finish this up, and then we'll take a break. We don't have too much to go. But if you look on pages 188 and 189, this is where it really starts becoming powerful. How to add and remove nodes from the DOM. Somebody can click something, and if they click something, or if they provide some information and click a button, maybe you've got hidden text that doesn't show until someone is registered. All right? That would be adding a node. In other words, you're adding something to a web page. Maybe you ask the person their age, and depending on their age, you either add something to a web page or remove something from a web page. That is adding and removing those nodes from the document object model. This right here, I want to show you this, in my humble opinion, when you are working with web pages, inner HTML is the most powerful thing you can work with, because anything on a web page that has an ID, you can change what it says by changing its inner HTML property. All right? And they show you examples here. Now, the example they give, there's nothing wrong with it. It wouldn't be the one I'd use, but it's fine. It says an application that displays a list of images. Okay? And you got to create an image list. Maybe it's just going to show all of them. Maybe it's going to be set up so that all of them are hyperlinked. You probably have seen this on a web page where they're all thumbnails, and you can click on one of them and it'll show a big picture of it. You could do that if you wanted to. You could do anything you wanted to do with it. All right. They give you a little bit of starting HTML. Okay. And notice in here, it says once you make changes to the DOM, what we've looked at when you hit the F12 key, what we have looked at has been the console. If you are changing things with the document object model, if you're adding stuff or removing stuff, you want to go over to the Elements tab. That's one of the questions on your test. Promise. That'll be on the test. So then they go back in the last couple pages here, 192 through 196, which ends the chapter, and they go back to that same thing we had here before, that register for account. But notice what they've added to it. They've added a table at the bottom that shows you not only what you did right, but what you did wrong. All right? And you'll notice the stuff that's required that you didn't put in, that's now in red. It's not that you'd have to do this, but I mean, you can only so much account for human intelligence or lack thereof. If somebody keeps putting something wrong in there, you can keep telling them. All right? So they show you here on the beginning some HTML here. Again, notice IDs. They don't have names on here. Quite often, though, again, you would. But to actually make this stuff happen, so to speak, all the JavaScript is shown on page 195. And again, there's enough of it. If you are a web programmer, you might say, well, you know what? I'm not even going to put code in. I'm not going to check for this. No one's going to put in something stupid in this. Yeah, someone will. By accident, on purpose to see what happens, or whatever. So anything that's on a form, if you're a web programmer, that you don't program so that it's checked to make sure you don't allow garbage into a system, that's on you. All right. So, as the author says here, because this is it, the goal of this chapter is to introduce you to what you can do with the DOM. We could make a whole course on working with the DOM. We could do that. All right? There's a heck of a lot to do. Okay. It says, before you continue, you should know there's a limit on how much DOM scripting you should do with JavaScript. Why? Because you write so much code that you might want to go and write jQuery instead. All right, just for that reason. All right, so we're going to take a break. We get done with a break. We'll quickly do our test review. All right, you've got that in front of you. And after we do the test review, which I'm not going to tape, all right, but after we do that, we're going to go into Chapter 7. Good news is Chapter 7 is very short. All right, so it is 9. Let's come back, please, at 9:15.